What's the most unexpectedly profound piece of advice you've ever received? Story 1. Don't set yourself on fire just to make someone else warm. Imagine a line in a chalkboard and it represents all the things a relationship needs: house chores, income, childcare, emotional support, compassion, shelter, safety, everything. If you agreed to split everything up 50-50, are you going to be able to do everything that you agreed to do all the time? No, you won't. Sometimes you can only do 40% of the stuff on the line. Sometimes you can't do any of it. You're sick or something. And even if you were able to do everything in your half of that line, your partner will have times that can't fulfill all of their obligation. There's always going to be a gap. Therefore, you can't think of marriage as a 50% even split. You have to always be willing to do 100% so that when life happens, there's not a gap. Story 2. Probably the only way out is through. I'm a chronic procrastinator, so when something's stressing me out, I try to ignore it. But at some point, you've got to deal with it. Same vein as you can either spend 10 mins on this now or 2 hours in a week's time. Stuff gets worse the longer you sit on it. Story 3. Regarding romantic relationships, it shouldn't be that hard. Became a great measure and anchor for dating and knowing when to get out. Life is hard enough. It shouldn't be hard to be with your person. Story 4. Warren Buffett had some awesome bits of wisdom yesterday on CNBC. One of them was you can always tell someone to go to hell tomorrow. Basically, wait to cool down a bit before reacting to someone. Story 5. I had a friend who was getting their life together after being abused by their ex and overcoming a drug addiction. I asked him how he was holding it all together, and he said to me, "Peace comes in pieces." And I realized how true that is. Story 6. So decades ago in my world travels, a random Australian woman in a seedy bar once told me that the trick to a successful marriage is that both partners have to secretly believe they got the better end of the deal. Of course, each should do what they can here and there to keep the other deep down believing it. I've gotten 20 years of a dang good marriage so far out of that unexpectedly profound advice. Story 7. It may not be your fault, but it's your responsibility. Changed a lot for me. And recovery is not a straight line like we want it to be. It's up and downs, but the point is that when you're down, you're still higher than you were when you started. Edited to add, since I've received a number of comments about the first quote. Context is important. Almost any piece of advice can be twisted and used in an insidious way. In my case, that quote was about overcoming trauma in life. I've endured a great deal of trauma, from my childhood into my adult years, due in large part, but not entirely, to abuse at the hands family, mostly my parents. All the trauma I endured is not my fault. It is my responsibility to heal myself and deal with it so I don't continue the cycle of abuse on myself or others. Hope that helps. Friends, before we continue our video, I want to remind you of the importance of subscribing to our channel. We are also waiting for your comments and likes. Thank you. Let's move on to the video. Story 8. My therapist saw through my bullshit that I had convinced myself of. I would let relatively minor things f my entire day or week. In session one day, I was expressing that my day had and whatnot, and he asked me, "Did you have a bad day, or did you have a bad 5 minutes, and then let that ruin an otherwise ok day?" Obviously, it wasn't some moment that instantly changed all of my thought processes, but it was something that he and I worked on over months towards letting that question be one of the first things I ask myself when something happens. Story 9. When something told me something was wrong in my story, they were generally right. If they told me how to fix it, they were generally wrong. Neil Gaiman. Made me think a lot about criticism and advice. Story 10. In high school, I confided in a beloved teacher when I discovered my mom was again smoking behind my family's back, something that greatly upset me. She told me a lot, but what really opened my eyes was adults are people too. That was almost 20 years ago, but it stays with me. It's very hard to transition to an adult relationship with your parents, and we are raised to view certain people in certain positions as infallible or above us. It's something I still come back to in my mind, looking at other adults around me. Story 11. When making a decision, think, do I actively want this thing, or am I doing it because I'm afraid of what will happen if I don't? I made fear-based decisions my entire life, because that's how I was taught to make them, until someone said that to me. Story 12. Someone's illness isn't their fault, but it is their responsibility. Also, from the same person, you can be sick and still be an asshole. My ex-husband got diagnosed with a chronic illness shortly after we got married. He couldn't cope and pushed everyone out, including me. For a long time, I was excusing his behavior by saying, "But it's because he's sick," and blaming myself for thinking I was doing something wrong. We had been going to couples therapy since his diagnosis, and the therapist wasn't very good. My ex was also lying, I later found out, about a bunch of stuff. The whole thing was a disaster. I was at some social event and ran into a tarot reader of all people. Their day job was as a death doula, kind of like a grief counselor. And they also happened to have a chronic illness. I explained my situation, and those were the quotes they gave me. It changed my life. I was really struggling with grief and my ex's actions, and in 1 hour the tarot reader gave me better advice and guidance than the years of therapy I'd be in since my ex kicked me out of the house. This is a good note to end on. Please rate your stories in the comments. I'll be happy to add them to future videos. Also, you can rate our other videos. We would be very grateful. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day.